Welcome to this episode of Men Who Understood the Times. I'm Michael, and we've got Andy and Josh here. Uh, so our disclaimer is we're just three guys on a Sunday evening, late on a Sunday evening that are talking about things over drinks, and we're not talking for our church body or our churches or our school. Josh, what are you drinking tonight?
Um, I'm hearkening back to the motherland. I've got some shells.
Oh my goodness.
When I was in New Ulm this past summer, I brought a 12 pack back and then totally forgot I had it. Like it was in the back of our closet, and so put it
Yeah,
on
what?
ice, and here it is.
See, I'm glad you like it because I went to New Ulm and a couple of years ago for graduation at Martin Luther College, and so I was there. I thought the thing to do is buy shells, and I tasted it, and I said, "Oh my goodness!" I had to give it away. I didn't care for it at all. So I might get kicked out of the Senate for that, but that's the way I felt. Andy, what are you drinking?
Well, here's an actual disclaimer too that most of the best beers we know are stored in the back of a closet. But I'm drinking a highball again. However, this time I've got the Walmart version of the Luxardo Cherry in my drink.
All right. Well, and I am drinking in since tomorrow is my birthday and my wife has left to go visit our daughter and son-in-law and our granddaughter in Wisconsin. She bought me some old smoky salty caramel whiskey and then wearing my birthday gift of a Bigfoot shirt that says I found him, Casper, Wyoming. Uh, so one of the things too is a reminder, we talked about this last time, that you can now support this new ministry of Men Who Understood the Times. I'll share the link with people. And that's for being able to maybe do some advertising, better microphones, maybe do some conferences and so forth. One of the things that the three of us also talked about was to, we'd like to have some YouTube reels and Facebook reels and things like that, but we're all busy, or in some of our cases, we're older and don't know how to do that stuff. So I'm looking for an unpaid intern, and we'll call you Carl. So maybe you understand that reference. And if you're willing to help us out with this for a while, and then Lord willing, if money comes in, then we can make you a paid intern. So what we touched on the last time that we're going to go on the third rail and talk about things that people don't really want to talk about. So we're jumping on the third rail tonight as we're going to be talking about Islam, and we're going to begin. Josh, if you want to tell us anything you want to about the false religion of Islam.
So I'm by no means an expert in Islam. Um, uh, I've been working my way through a copy of the Quran. Um, Islam is a displacement religion with a false version of Christ. And in many ways, it apes the Bible or copies the Bible. It was written several hundred years after the Bible, and um, the the basic framework, and I'll go through a couple of quotes here, but the basic framework is um, your mandate, your purpose is to go out to other countries, infiltrate them. You may lie initially, but then eventually to subjugate and conquer those peoples. And initially, once Sharia law is imposed, as is happening right now in many parts of Europe, apparently including in London, um, like London and Paris have ostensibly fallen like now. And if you're not aware of this, do a YouTube search or Google search of Islam in London, and it's remarkable. Um, well, first they just say just convert to Islam. We'll leave you alone. At least initially, like you'll be required to, attend the mosque and learn all this stuff, and your women will be subjugated then and required to wear a hijab or a burqa. Um, But the way it works is, hey, when the real strong oppression hits, step one, just bend the knee to Allah, who, in case you don't know, is not God the Father. That's a common misconception. We do not worship the same God. Um, and one of the reasons I can say that is because the first thing is just deny Christianity, deny the divinity of Christ. Um, they they do not preach that Jesus was God, um, that he was resurrected, that he was even crucified. That's a matter of debate from what I've read. Um, but the entire thing is a counterfeit of Christianity. And so if you say no, I'm a Christian or a Jew, either way, well then you have the option of paying what's called the jizya, which is a tax that is designed to um, well take money away from you and give to them first of all. And if you don't want to pay that, well then you can be killed. And what's really remarkable is as I began researching this, the algorithm got a hold of me and began sending me imams in the US. That's like their version of a pastor. They're not being shy about this. It's like, yeah, we're gonna come in your country and we're gonna outbreed you. And we figured out how to access your political system. So we'll just come in here and we'll overwhelm your school boards and we'll overwhelm your your city government, and we'll get you elected to mayor. And once we have a majority, because you guys have a democracy here, at least to the extent of like locally, you can change local laws, and we're going to just take over and impose Sharia law. And you're watching this happening in various parts, large cities in Michigan, Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's happening in Texas, and um, the moms are saying, well, we tried bullets that didn't work, and so now we're doing ballots. And also, it's worth noting that they are outbreeding um, all other types of Americans, or people who are here because they're not Americans, like 8 to 1. Like the average Muslim family has 8 children, and the average white family has one. Um, the average Hispanic family has three. So, and just a couple of things that really struck me, like from the Quran itself. And the way that this works is you have surahs, which are readings from the Quran itself. And then you also have hadiths, which are things that scholars said about the Quran, some of which are canonical, some are not. And there's a lot of them. And so a lot of heavy reading here. But just a couple things. Um, so the verse of the sword is going to be, let's see here, verse, it's Quran 9, verse 5. When the sacred months are drawn away, slay the idolaters wherever you find them, and take them, confine them, and lie in wait for them in every place of ambush. But if they repent, perform the prayer, pay the alms, let them go their way. So again, here you have the things there. If they deny Jesus and confess Islam, leave them alone. If they pay the alms, that's the jizya, and if not, slay them. If you leave Islam later, then you're an apostate and you can or should be killed. Um, and the other thing I found really disturbing, it's it's widely known that Muhammad married Aisha at 6 years old and then consummated the marriage at 9 years old. This is from Hadith 4840, Muhammad bin Yusuf. Quote, she was a girl of 9 years when they consummated the marriage. And so you have pedophilia that's justified and propagated, and women have ostensibly no rights whatsoever under Islam. You are the property of a man if you are under Islam. You are the property of your father as a young girl, who then transfers that property ownership to your husband, and you don't necessarily have a say in that transaction. And so I could go on, but this this is not good. It's not good.
Yeah. And what we're going to encourage you to do is, do what we've been doing the last few weeks. Just there's lots of videos out there. And a lot of them, sadly, are from places like England and so forth, where ladies are filming themselves being confronted by Muslims. One I saw the other day of the Muslim man in a park is saying, yeah, it is my right to rape you. That is my culture.
Mhm.
I can do
Yeah,
that to
I have
you.
needs.
What's that?
He said, "I have needs."
Yeah,
I saw that
exactly.
video. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's others that have uh, made videos and made claims to the government who won't do anything for it because they're afraid of the Muslims, and where ladies are afraid to leave their house. Uh, Another video I watched is a lady has to have her huge dog, say like a pit bull with her, because the Muslims don't like dogs and they'll shy away, but she has to have a dog with her just as protection. And so again, you don't need to take our word for it. You can go and research these things on your own. And then Andy, I think you can talk about the same thing too with Islam. But one of the things that struck me was you and I going to college and the seminary, we were very well versed and rightly so on how to counteract the false teachings of things like Catholicism and Reformed theology. But those are still believers that we're going to see in heaven one day. They're still a part of the Holy Christian Church as we confess in the creeds. We are not trained at all in how to interact with or combat Islam. Not one bit. So, but go ahead and talk about anything you want to as far as the Islamic faith.
Sure, I'll riff on Islam a little bit and overlap probably with both of you a little bit as well. But first and foremost, Islam is a work righteous false religion, right? It's built on what they call the five pillars. I'm not going to remember all the uh, Arabic names, but I know the creed, right? They call that the Shahada. Pilgrimage, which is easier to remember, that's the Hajj. Prayer, uh, almsgiving or tithing, and or tithing and then almsgiving. So those five, they're excuse me, I forgot fasting. Fasting is the one. So almsgiving and tithing are kind of the same, and then you've got fasting. Those are their routine practices to live out their faith in the hope that they can somehow curry favor with the all oppressive God, Allah. There's, we haven't mastered any kind of study of the Quran, but I'm pretty sure there are scant few descriptions or attributes of Allah that have to do with mercy and grace and benevolence, but rather, basically like this big ogre God who does not open wide the gates, but rather keeps them excruciatingly narrow. Moreover, the way to curry favor with Allah, the ultimate way, is of course through martyrdom, but there are other ways too. The whole concept of Islam is built around these demonic agendas and issues like lying on purpose. It is sanctioned, it is pious to lie so long as it furthers the cause of Islam, glorifies or furthers the name of Allah or Muhammad, or furthers a Muslim in their ascension to a higher position of power so that they can carry out more supremacy. Well, that practice is called taqiyya. So it's absolutely sanctioned to practice lying so long as it advances your cause. Think of how duplicitous and deceitful that is. That's all, of course, under Sharia law. There's the jizya, the tax on non-believers, as Josh mentioned. There's sanctioned polygamy. There's sanctioned pedophilia. There's actually, dirty little secret, sanctioned homosexuality. Like a lot of our American war heroes and soldiers saw grotesque practices in Iraq and Afghanistan that they're so scarred, it's hard for them to even talk about. They practice something called female circumcision, which is essentially genital mutilation on young girls, which is, again, grotesque. Josh brought up St. Paul, Minneapolis, Minnesota. There's New York, which is uh, a growing fire. There's Dallas, which is a really big problem, and we're not doing a lot in the political sphere to curb the expansion and the agendas of Islam. There's also Detroit. Everybody remembers Dearborn, but it's spilling over into Detroit a little bit. It's already spilled over into a near suburb of Detroit called Hamtramck, Michigan. When I served in Michigan for a short 6 years, I had an elderly member who also used to take me. He was a bachelor, a widower. He always used to take me to this Polish restaurant. It was a mom and pop restaurant, family owned and operated in the basement of this old school Hamtramck house. And the Polish babushkas would make all their homemade scratch potato pancakes, the best Polish sausage, and rail drinks for $2. That whole city now is overrun by the minarets call to prayer 5 times a day. This is in America. This is in Hamtramck, Michigan. And as the gentlemen were saying earlier, if you think this is a little sensational, go online, X, go on YouTube, search out objective news sources and watch not just London, but almost all of England is being overrun by diversity policies that are warm for some odd reason to Islam and its initiatives. Go and look at what's happening in Paris and in France, the no-go zones. Go and look at what's happening in Africa. Germany has actually got a huge Islamic or Muslim problem. This is an existential threat, not just to America or say our political system, but to many other Western nations too. And as Josh rightly said to begin with, it's not just a displacement theology or false religion that's opposed to Western values writ large. It's absolutely opposed to Christianity.
Yeah, and then
I just say real,
okay.
if you have small children who are listening to this podcast, I've got a couple things in the chamber here. You should turn this off because this is, to discuss this. Um, like one of the things Andy just mentioned is again, turn this off, ladies, little ears. Okay, you've had your warning. The whole thing with female genital mutilation. That is such a good, concise summary of how women are treated in Islam. They are not allowed to orgasm. And if you like Google this FMJ, female genital mutilation, um, um, so that's not right. I got that wrong. Just female genital mutilation in Chad, Niger, and Mauritania, and the stats are just profound. The number of young women this is done to, and Ayan Hirsi Ali was talking about this as well, and also mercy with Allah is totally arbitrary unless you die in an attempt to kill kafir, which are infidels. And so the only assurance that you have in Islam of actually attaining salvation is if you actively die trying to kill Jews and Christians. So I'm sorry I cut you off. Go ahead.
Nope. Yeah, because we're going to look at some of the lies of the past too. So to understand that what we're dealing with here is an age-old problem. It's before America became a nation, Thomas Jefferson was dealing with the Barbary pirates, which were Muslims. Martin Luther had some famous writings about the Turks. And by God's grace, he used the Turks at one time, were the Muslims who are taking the Holy Roman Emperor's attention away so that Luther and the reformers can have the Reformation. Okay. But that's how long it's been around. And then even longer with the Crusades. So we want to talk about here then is the lies of the Crusades, the lies of the past. One of the things that I'll do is I'm going to share a video on my Facebook page, Resisting the Dragon's Beast, because that's my book title. And I'll share that this week. It's a 2 hour video. Uh, I watched it this morning getting ready for church on 1.5 speed. Since I talk fast, I listen fast too. And it is it was an interview with Raymond Ibrahim. And uh, I would encourage you to read his books. So these are four of his books, all dealing with the Muslims. Two Swords of Christ, Defenders of the West, Sword and Scimitar, Crucified Again, and then I guess there's another one, The Battle of Yarmouk. So there's at least five of them that he has written. So I would encourage you to watch that video. He is very knowledgeable on Islam, and he talked about the Crusades and so forth. And he lays it out really well that everything that we're taught about the Crusades is a lie. So if you want to go ahead and touch on that, Josh.
Well, I bought this book. I didn't get a chance to go all the way through it. It's really good. It's incredibly well done. And how have I not learned this before? Like this was not in any of the history classes that I took. Um, I mean, one of the things that the degree to which white slaves were um, a desirable commodity in, I mean, you think about, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. That's the Marine Corps theme song, right? The shores of Tripoli. Why were they going to Tripoli? To fight Barbary pirates, the Muslim pirates. And when, oh, help me out, it wasn't Roosevelt. Was it Roosevelt or Jefferson? Jefferson.
Yeah.
He met with the leaders and said, like, what, we bear you no ill will. Like, we want to trade with you. What are you doing? Why are you capturing and enslaving our people? And he said, well, because we can, and our holy book tells us to. And like this same thing is happening today. Um, and what's really fascinating is the absolute silence of the Black Lives Matter people. You have actual slavery of Africans today, in Northern Africa. Um, and you have slavery in Turkey, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, most of North Africa. And then you have genocide of Christians who are all African. And there's just crickets from our media. And it is truly remarkable how the narrative is overwhelming this. But this book, I'm only on page 89, but this is excellent. I would recommend it. So I've not read The Two Swords of Christ, but um, our Amazon bill is creeping up a little bit, but that looks really good too.
Yeah, since I moved out west, I've been reading all kinds of books on trapping and hunting and the beaver trade because that's how the West was won. And I think I'm going to set those books aside to deal with the Crusades. And one of the things that I learned in that video this morning, was the Vikings. That the Vikings would come in and they would capture the white slaves you were talking about, the Europeans, and then they would sell those men and women to the Muslims. And
Well, the word slave comes from Slav,
yeah,
as in the Slavic people. Like the, those are white Europeans. Like the word itself refers to captured whites.
yeah. Uh, so, I almost mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the demons and the angels and the cryptids and so forth. So, before I moved from Racine, I had gotten a tattoo on my left arm of Saint Michael the Archangel, but as a tough guy. Well, now since I'm going to be studying the Crusades, and a lot of my Instagram feed is filled with all kinds of images and videos of the Crusades that I might get a Crusader on my right arm, except that it took me 15 years to do this tattoo, and I'm cheap too, so we'll see if I do that. But I'm motivated that. To keep studying the Crusades because when we look at later on in this episode of where we need to go, I'm wondering if it's going to be a crusade. So, Andy, what do you want to talk about with the lies of the Crusades?
I definitely need to read up more on the Crusades as well. But listening to the same video that you shared, Joshua, and that Mike watched this morning, it was striking simply that it the lies we believe for the last, I mean, how long has it been in our, not just our public school system, but probably our Lutheran parochial school system too, that we've always had to say something along the lines of what Timothy Keller has said, that the Crusades have to do with not just people acting in an unchristian way, but acting in a way that wasn't Christian enough. When in fact, the reality is that the Crusades were essentially a reaction to the barbaric conquering uh, efforts of the Ottoman Turks, or earlier the Muslims, right? And they were converting by compulsion, by force, by the sword. And so, and sometimes the main contributor to that video even pointed out that sometimes the Christians even delayed, like they wouldn't even go back and try to retake lands that had been forcefully or forcibly taken from them for 100, 200, 300 years. So to call the Crusades this impulsive, like, um,
Mhm.
you know, conquistadorian oppression instigating effort by Christians just to be similarly forceful in converting people is such a lie. It does not fairly represent history, much less Christianity.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to understand because we don't study history. That is one of the big faults of us as American Christians. We don't know our history. That the Middle East, Egypt, Northern Africa, those were hotbeds of Christianity in the first centuries after Christ sent his apostles out. Well, what happened? Those were not always Muslim countries because Islam came around, several centuries after Christ. Well, what happened? They started conquering all of those places, the Middle East and Egypt, Northern Africa. They pushed into Europe and so forth. They had taken over the Holy Land, and that's exactly it. That's why I would encourage everyone to watch that video and other books and videos uh, by Raymond Ibrahim because he is exposing the lies that there were things that the some of the Christians did do wrong. He mentions that, as the Christian peasants were in Israel, for the Crusades, that they went off on their own and they killed the Jews because they didn't believe in Christ, but they were chastised for it by their own kings and so forth. That the nobles, they were fighting the infidel. They were fighting the Muslims, the Turks, because of the horrific things that the Muslims were doing to Christians.
Yeah,
Anything
and
else
Mike,
yeah, go ahead.
well, just one last cap on that. If you go on NPH's website right now, do you know how much historical information we can get from our publishing house? And I'm not making a overarching commentary about NPH, good or bad. I'm just simply saying that, to your point, our failure to study history, on our website, we have literally one book about Islam, speaking the truth in love to Muslims. Now, you can find more on CPH's website, but overall, really, you have to go Barnes and Noble or Amazon to find really good and really reliable historical information about Islam. And then to do so, knowing that those markets with Amazon and Barnes and Noble, you have to be really, really discerning because you can't necessarily trust every author.
Yeah, because they're going to come with a different worldview than we are as confessional Lutherans. Good point. And then let's touch on the lies of the present. And I think the big lie is that anytime that a Muslim does something that is, as a terrorist, it is violent and so forth, what will the media always say? Well, that he was acting on his own because Islam is a religion of peace. They're very docile. Josh, what would you say to that? That Islam is a religion of peace?
Um, I would say, have you read the Quran? Because no, it's not. It's not peaceful at all. Islam, the word Islam means submission. It means submission to Sharia law. It is the imposition of Sharia law. I think it is definable less as a religion than as a totalitarian uh, religious political system that has a totalitarian control of all aspects of your life. Um, and the things that are congruent with Islam, I did just look this up, by the way. So uh, FGM, and I'm hung up on this because it's so awful. I think I said FMJ before. I was reading about Full Metal Jacket rounds for deer hunting, so I'm sorry. Um, 31% of women aged 15 to 50 have undergone um, the removal of the clitoris, um, according to UNICEF in the country of Chad. And that is per Islamic law or per Islamic practice. Um, it's not a religion of peace. You have the verse of the sword. You are directed to kill anyone who leaves. And it's just an incredibly violent, conquest oriented um, religion. And the other thing that's really interesting about this is the odd bedfellows that the radical left has made with Islam. And so I mean, Queers for Palestine, uh, the moment that Sharia law is actually imposed, they begin killing homosexuals. Now, I don't agree with homosexuality, but they should not be killed. My goodness. Under Islam, they are. They're either thrown from a high place or they're stoned to death. And so it is not a religion of peace in any way, shape, or form. And whoever says so is either ignorant or lying directly to you.
Right. And again, people can do their own research. So I encourage you to do that because if you watch videos by former Muslims, they will tell you that if uh, Muslims are not violent, then they're not real Muslims. They are not
Mhm.
following they are not following the book, their book. So, and we can touch on this too with these lies, and you can go with this is, again, in my reading, what Muslims will do in a place, they move in, and then when they have, say, like 10% of the population, they'll just go along to get along. When they have 20%, then they'll start playing the victim. When it's 40%, Josh had talked about this earlier before we started recording about the noble Muslim. So they'll start bowing down in the streets and praying, stopping traffic. But
Blocking.
then when it gets to be like 50%, then they'll start demanding change. They'll change by force. So this is what Andy had talked about earlier about the cities here in America, the cities in Europe that are being taken over because they're building up that population. Then you see it that what happens at the 10%, 20%, 40%, 50%. So go ahead and Andy and talk about the lies of the present.
So I want to highlight very deliberately that there is this unholy alliance between Islam and the left, and it's undeniable. So the left has, especially the Marxist, the extreme Marxist left, but really any Marxist, and that nowadays unfortunately includes practically all the left. Um, they have a tactic called stochastic entryism, where they get in by being nice and quiet and relatively docile, and they go along to get along. However, once they secure more allies, people who are warm to their cause or empathetic, toxically empathetic to their cause, then they begin to, and they um, ascend to positions of power within, say, a corporation. We're talking about the left now. What they'll do is they'll control hiring practices. So they weed out antagonists and they weed out people who are more conservative, and they weed out those who don't fit the affirmative action agenda that they might have. And so what they do is they end up subverting, or to say it another way, overtaking that enterprise by virtue of the entryism through which they've brought in, through their gatekeeping, all their own allies, and they take down that ship. Okay, Muslims are effectively doing the same. And that's why the radical left, but the entire left is radical now. That's why the left and Islam have turned out to be strange bedfellows. Now, I say that quite deliberately because it needs to be said on the one hand, and the proof is everywhere. I mean, think about how much history has to be denied in order to suggest that Islam is a religion of peace. Think about how many contemporary news stories have to be suppressed in order to maintain this deceit that Islam has innocuous goals. More, but at the same time, it needs also to be said that this is not just a left thing or a radical thing. It's also on the right, because plenty of men on the right have been bought off. And even George Bush, after 9/11, made uh, made a concerted effort to come out and say, this is not all our Islamic or Muslim brothers and sisters, or, that kind of thing. Because either he had been duped, or he, in his own way, though maybe not an adherent of Islam, is practicing a form of political taqiyya.
Well, we were talking about this again before we started recording. If you want to touch on, since you mentioned the right, the difficulty or the problem of the right of our president, President Trump, buying into this, and what he's doing, or maybe not doing enough to
Sure.
eradicate this scourge on America.
Well, let me begin at just a notch, a level, just a notch lower.
Mhm.
I have heard, I can't, I don't know that I've got bookmarked the posts about it, but I'm beginning to hear a drumbeat of criticism about Governor Abbott in Texas, because he's not doing much, if anything at all, to curb the influx of Islamic takeover going on right now in Fort Worth and Dallas. That's a big problem, and that's on the right, right? Also, you've got President Trump, who, I mean, I can't know his true motive, but at least on paper or news reports, it seems to be dollar signs everywhere in economic. And we're making these treaties with Middle Eastern, predominantly Islamic countries, such as Qatar, which is how I've heard it's pronounced, where they can train their Air Force pilots in Idaho now. Why? Why? When we know for a fact on record that Saudi Arabia and Qatar were sponsors of those who trained to participate in the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So I'm not saying that we should be that we should avoid all diplomacy with all countries in the Middle East necessarily. I'm not necessarily trying to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just questioning the strategy of inviting into our midst more Muslims.
So another video that I'll share on my Resisting the Dragon's Beast Facebook page, and I encourage everyone uh, to follow that and so forth. So one of the things that I've been doing now, since my Instagram is filled with some of the things that I follow, and there's these images of warriors, of crusaders with Bible verses and so forth. So I share an image every day, just trying to encourage people, to remind them that we are in a war. I mentioned it in my sermon today, talking about Judgment Day, that uh, we have the enemies that are coming at us, and we are still called to turn the other cheek, forgive 70 times seven, to pray for those who persecute us, to be salt in as seasoning in a decaying world, to be light in a pagan darkness. At the same time, Christ calls us to be warriors. He calls us to be his soldiers, to lift high the cross of Jesus, and that he is going on before. That the text I was preaching on, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 5 through 10, where Paul says very clearly, God is going to bring trouble on those who trouble us. And he says it's going to be on Judgment Day, but it's also now. And the ones that he may use to cause trouble for those who trouble us is us as his warriors. That's that wonderful dichotomy that's difficult for us to understand as Christians to be soft, to turn the other cheek, but that's as individuals. The other part is if someone's attacking me, I'm going to turn the other cheek. I pray I would. If someone is attacking my wife or my children or my granddaughter, all bets are
Absolutely.
off. Then I am called to be a warrior. I am called to be a lion, a soldier in Christ's army that and we've forgotten that we have over the last few decades here in America that we have become soft as Christians. We're going to touch on that, but before I get to what do we do next, uh, on resisting the dragon's beast, I'm sharing those images, but I'll also share an excellent video on from Prager University with Xavier. It's called "Why the Radical Left Merged with Radical Islam." So go ahead and watch that. That's a shorter video. That's only 30 minutes. But Josh, before we move on, what do we do? Anything you want to talk about with uh, the connection of Islam with the left?
Sure. Well, first of all, what we do, you know, spreading awareness of this to encourage people who have the ability to engage in politics to do so as Christians. Um, I have no desire to run for political office. But I have colleagues who I think will be very good in those roles, and we need to do that if for no other reason at this point to slow down the infiltration of Islamic culture into our um, into our like neighborhood politics. I would also add to this. I just emailed you, Mike. FONDA poll, so Fonda poll. This is I don't get along with French very well. I'm going to butcher this. Foundation pour l'innovation politique. I believe the French would be the Foundation for Innovative Politics, but it's in French. So um, it's a poll on our polling data on Islamic terrorist attacks in the world, 1979 to 2024. Um, Data collected through April 12th of 2024. And just for contrast, before I set this number off, it claims that there have been 2,700 attacks from Christians or from a Christian perspective. From an Islamic perspective, there have been 66,872 Islamic attacks worldwide, number 70 countries. So how that translates into being a religion of peace, and it, they're following their book. Anybody who picks up a sword or an AR-15 or whatever and kills people is not following the teaching of Jesus Christ. They're not being good Christians. Any sinful person, you can say, well, okay, that's not what Christianity is. That's not what it says. Um, if, I mean, these attacks are fulfilling what the Quran says you're supposed to do. And so the first step is knowledge. You have to understand that this is completely incompatible with Western civilization. And it's very different than any other form of immigration. We're supposed to show, the narrative is that we're supposed to show how tolerant and loving we are as people by just throwing open our borders and letting anybody else in. One of the things that a border is biblical. National sovereignty is a biblically defensible concept. And one of the reasons for that is because it separates ideas and it separates truth from non-truth. And so, to the extent that you feel bad about opposing immigration laws or what ICE is doing to restore balance to the system right now. You don't like how that's going. Um, do you like freedom for your wives and children? And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that. I don't think it's tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists. Again, just hop online. What do imams say? Imam IMAMS. What do they say is going to happen with Islam in the next 40 years? Like they're not being shy about what the game plan is here. And so it's important to know what the game plan is and then to oppose that to the degree that we have been given access to the levers of power for politics in our country. That's going to be part of our biblical stewardship is doing all that we can to slow the spread.
Yeah. Yeah. So a big part of it is being aware. So I was just looking around because I can hear the wind here. So people warned me before I moved to Casper, like January, while I was still holding the call out here, I talked to one of our members and I said, "Hey, I looked at the winds out there and it's like 26-mile-an-hour winds because I'm a cyclist, so I check out the wind as I would never go biking in 26-mile-an-hour winds." He goes, "Oh, that's just a breeze. We get 50-mile-an-hour gusts. That's what's hitting my house right now." But I knew it and I was aware of it and I still moved out here. And I just use that as an illustration. We need to be aware of this. We, as churches and pastors, need to be preaching about this. Uh, Again, the three of us kind of talked about this off air about where do we see Islam in the Bible? And I think you can apply it in Revelation chapter 6 about the seals. And I'll read it and then I kind of explain where Islam fits in. John writes, "I watched as a lamb opened the first of the seven seals. Then I heard one of the four living creatures say in a voice like thunder, 'Come.' I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest." We believe that this is Jesus Christ, the rider on the white horse, that no matter what happens, that he is going to be preaching the gospel until judgment day. So we have to remember that. And that's our job. That's what we do as a teacher in the high school and us as pastors in the churches, what this podcast is about. Verse 3, John says, "When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, 'Come.' Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword." That's war. We've just been laying out that for a millennium and a half, the Muslims have been at war with Christians and others around the world. It is bloodshed. Verse 5, "When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, 'Come.' I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine.'" That's famine. And again, if you actually study real history, you realize that any place where the Muslims have conquered, the living uh, the living situation has gone down. They are not creative because that's not their religion. Uh, they may be creative for a while just because they've taken over the other cultures, but eventually it goes down. And then what happens? All you have to do is look at, we call it this, third world countries. And then verse 7, "When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, 'Come.' I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth." And there, that fourth rider is Death. And we've been laying out this death. And I looked, and I've got that link, Josh, that you sent. So I'll share that link as well so people can do the research on their own and see the death and the famine and the war that Muslims have brought with them for a millennium and a half. Uh, and if you want to talk about that, what do we do now? Because my thing is we preach, but it's also politics. It has to be both.
Well, there is a clear evangelistic call here, isn't there? First of all, I would say we should never, ever, I'm not saying this just to patronize fellow Christians either. I'm begging you to consider the importance of prayer when it comes to the world stage and some of these threats to us, both opposing the gospel as community, as individual churches, whatever. Um, there is this gets me kind of frustrated when people, on the one hand, we Wells Lutherans especially do such a careful and concerted job of maintaining that Christians have the freedom in Christ to participate in the political realm. But it's like the 11th commandment, another one, to not talk about the things that are political. Isn't that participating in the political realm, especially in our country? It is not unsanctified to have these conversations. Okay, I digress. But let me just take that a little further. As in the paper that I wrote called Fishers of Men, one of the points I made is that, and I borrow this from an author named Carl Trueman, but I agree with him that the apolitical is no more. The Marxists, through the last 150 years, have done such an effective job of politicizing every arena of life. Well, that's a sad reality on the one hand, but that's almost like an open door for us as Christians to then remember that every arena of life is something addressed by the Bible. Therefore, first of all, we should have had permission already to talk about it, but all the more now when it's been so stained by the political, we need to be talking about it. And I don't just say for the sake of awareness, to circle back, I say for the sake of evangelism. Because look at what the Muslims are doing. They are eager and effective evangelists, particularly in the American prison system, aren't they? And through entryism, I focused on what the left does in practice, but Muslims, they're willing to wait generations if need be. They're willing to keep on, having kids and building through families and community takeovers the strength that they need to overwhelm and then overcome the system in place. But all the while, they're doing it without any ounce of eternal security, especially by comparison to us. In fact, by the way, just to take a tangent here, Douglas Murray, somewhere out there in the YouTube universe, has an interesting video because he's studied this a lot more even than we have probably. But he says a lot of Muslim countries, Islamic countries, have sort of this existential question like, we successfully take over regions or even countries in time, and yet, unless we have oil, we pretty much fail and become destitute. We're not successful, and we don't we don't succeed. And so they do have this, like, if we really are the chosen ones, and if we're really going to be the ones to take over the earth, how come we fail, and how come our countries are so impoverished and everything else? But again, I'm not even saying it for temporal reasons. I simply want Christians to begin with prayer. Pray that the Lord curb their efforts, stifle their efforts. Psalm 7:11, it's an easy one to remember. Psalm 7:11, the Lord pours out his judgments daily. And so he will, at our requests even, stifle and curb the efforts of these pagan, work righteous obsessors so that so that their attempts to oppose the gospel will, be drawn back, hopefully. But moreover, we pray also not just that they are curbed, but that they are converted, because these are people who desperately need a savior, and perhaps to an extreme that we don't think about or even pray enough about and consider enough. Pray that the Lord would penetrate that thick density, that veil of work righteousness, so that they might at least consider Christ, which, by the way, the Quran calls for them to consider the writings of the Torah and of the Bible, right? And then finally, this is just to throw in at the end. In addition to Revelation and the six seals, there is, at least I think, some credence to the thought that Muslims, many of them, have emanated from uh, Ishmael. And remember the prophecy about Ishmael in Genesis. He will be a wild donkey of a man. How unruly and how bastardized are so many Muslim cultures because of their work righteous demonic beliefs? Well, in that sense, perhaps it's at least a partial fulfillment of that prophecy.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the Muslims are reaching out to young men, older men in prisons and so forth, because they are coming with this masculine imagery and so forth that I think that we have lost as Christians here in America the last few decades. It's something I'm trying to be more bold with our people. And I'm just kind of wondering at my people, they're all older than me, so they're in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, but trying to remind them, we are to be bold because as bold Christians, but also this is what young men want. They want masculine Christianity, and they've been missing it. So what can happen? Well, they can go to something else that is pagan, but is masculine. We need to have the Christian masculinity that Christ is. There is nothing more masculine than a man that is willing to die for the person or the people, humanity that he loves. He's willing to fight for them, to go into battle against the devil himself and all of the demonic horde. Christ is the most masculine man there is. We need to be preaching that to our people, especially so that the women want that because they're looking for a masculine man. And the young men want that. They need to be taught to be the leader that Christ is. So let's be bold and give them what they want so that we can convert them, keep them, and oppose what Islam is teaching.
Mike, if I could just make
Yeah.
one brief comment, I amen to that. Our Christianity has become too proverbially skinny. We need more muscle, absolutely. But just a connected point, speaking against Islamic infiltration into our government, into our systems, into our communities, that is not necessarily being politically obsessive, nor is it demonstrating this romanticized want and vision for America per se. It is simply demonstrating a recognition of the spiritual battle at hand.
And I think it also is keeping of the seventh, ninth, and tenth commandments. It is holding on to what we've been given. And when we're willing to just give it away, we're breaking God's commandments. Josh, if you want to finish up with what you want to say about what do we do now as Christians, with this Muslim scourge?
Um, I want to put one more little point on the difference between Islam and Christianity here and what the scriptures have to say about warning us specifically about this. Um, in reading some of the writings of Muhammad himself and from Tabari, Volume 9, page 167, I'm going to paraphrase here a little bit. Muhammad got the Quran from, he initially thought, a demon. Like he thought it was either a demon or Satan. And then this entity then said, well, no, I'm actually the angel Gabriel. Um, and and then he tried to kill himself by throwing himself off of a high place. And so in Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 9, Paul warns, but even if we are an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let it be under God's curse. Um, and so Paul also describes 2 Corinthians 11:13, deceitful workers, and says that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. And so if Muhammad's reported visitation by Gabriel, that could be a demonic deception right there. In particular, if it comes in direct contradiction with what the Bible says about the nature of Christ himself. So that's number one. All right. It's important to know that that contradiction is there and that scripture does address it. And as far as what we do, I think we do two things overall. Um, we drop this notion that we have the luxury of time and the ability to sit in our bedroom slippers and just watch this unfold without doing anything. Um, we have action that we can take politically. We should do that as Christians and drop the notion that we can't engage anything politically because we're Christians. I'm not saying that the church should tell you how to vote, but we need to begin engaging. And the second thing is, insofar as we fail to have people from these countries come into our midst, one of the chief differences between the Quran and the Bible, um, Matthew 5:44, I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to those that hate you, pray for them who spitefully use and persecute you. And so these are people whom Jesus died for. Let us preach boldly to them. And if we die in the process, well, then there are worse ways to die, I suppose.
Thank you. And then, Josh, if you want to give us two news sources that you would like people to look at.
Um, I can give you one for
Okay.
sure. Ground news. It's just ground dot news. I like this because I wish I could share my screen with you here. It looks like a little Italian flag at the bottom, and left is blue, center is white, and right is red. And so um, here we have an article, and it says, "Okay, Trump urges U.S. House Republicans to vote to release the Epstein files," and that was reported on 35% of left-wing sources, 50% of center sources, and 15% of hard right Republican sources. And so it tells you the degree to which each story is being covered by the left or the right or the center. And so it's like, all right, if you have an article that's like totally blue or totally red, maybe try to find one with a little bit of difference. And so you at least know the bias that it's coming from. And so there's a free version of this and there's a paid version for this that's much more in depth. And so I'm actually contemplating subscribing to this. So yeah, ground.news.
All right. Thanks. And we did give everyone a couple of other things to look at with that PragerU video and the other YouTube video I'll be sharing. So lastly, then wrapping it up is usually now I've been sharing, something positive, something someone's written. This one is not so much positive is, because I'm the one that's sharing these podcasts on the different Facebook groups and so forth and trying to interact with people with the things I've written and recorded and so forth. And for the most part, people have been very receptive. They're encouraging. They're enjoying them and sharing them. But there are a few people, Christians, that are pushing back, and that's fine, except that it's unbiblical pushback. If they disagree with the things we say, that's fine, uh, but they're not biblical. And the key is that's why these podcasts are here. My encouragement then is if you disagree, you can disagree with us and write to us. But the better thing is first go and share this disagreement with your pastor. Go and talk to him and have a Bible study because nothing is ever solved on social media. So, like with the last one that we had shared maybe 2 weeks ago already, it had a firestorm on one of the Wells discussions groups. I got tired of commenting because it sounds harsh, but it's biblical where Jesus says, don't throw pearls before swine because the people aren't listening. Okay. And another pastor who's an administrator, he was engaging. Not that he was necessarily on my side, but he was engaging. And I did see him say today, I'm done with this conversation. I have better things to do. That's the key. We can't just keep engaging on social media. My encouragement is take whatever we're sharing on these podcasts. I would encourage you, have your pastor listen to these. Okay. Because it shouldn't just be us, the three of us saying it. We want other pastors and other churches saying this, and then you interacting with your pastor. That's the best relationship. And then we'll wrap it up here because as I knew we were going to be talking about this topic today, and I thought the gospel lesson that we had at our church for the focus on Judgment Day fits very well from Luke chapter 21, where Jesus said to them, and you can think of this in any context, but in the context of what we're talking about of uh, Muslims attacking us and attacking Christians for the last millennium and a half. Jesus says, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and plagues in various places. There will be horrifying sights and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, handing you over to synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. It will turn out to be your opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare beforehand how to defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends. They will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all people for my name's sake. But not a hair of your head will perish. By patient endurance, you will gain your lives. Lord's blessings until next week.